we are going into our last talk of this part of the summit. And that brings me to the opportunity to bring forward Don Weber, who is the principal security consultant and founder of Cutaway Security. Works in kind of in a cybersecurity space for about 19 years. I'm also very happy to say that he is a certified SANS instructor. He teaches ICS 410. Don is just one of those people that brings the beer to the barbecue. Just about every event I've ever been at where he is there, he seeks us out and says, what can I do to help? As soon as he is not actively working on something, he is absolutely in search of something to do and how to help others and help this community continue to grow and move forward. I've had an opportunity to work with Don for many years on projects, on red team activities, CTFs. Very, very excited to be working with Don as a author, lab developer for some new SANS ICS related courseware we're going to be working on this year. And just watching him and his hunger for new information and for growth, and equally as much to sort of give back to the community and help others. Just a great, great person to get to know better and to follow, because he will help you improve. He's one of those people that the more time you spend with him, the better you become. So Don, welcome, and I turn this over to you, sir.
Wow, thank you very much, sir. I need to confirm that everybody can hear me.
I certainly can.
Okay, awesome. So I'm
going
to assume that's everybody else. So, and I do have control of the slides for those that are curious. And I really appreciate it. Tim, thank you very much for that introduction. About, I don't know, I can't remember when the call for papers came out for this, but as soon as it came out, I instantly tried to come up with some ideas. I usually come up with some type of technical thing to talk about, and I listed out a few, and I was about to send the list to Tim to like, hey, which one would be the best one to submit? And at the last second, I added this thing in here, the lessons from 2 years of ICS security assessments. I was like, I don't know how I'll do it, but you know, he won't pick it. It won't be any big deal. So I just threw it at the end, and like almost immediately came back and like, this is the one we want. And I was like, and I haven't even thought about how to do this. So I'm extremely nervous about this because I'm going to be talking some about security assessments, and it's kind of touchy, but I think I've done it in a good way. Rob set the stage with some of the input that he put out there associated with what his team is seeing out in the field in 2020, what his red team is coming back with. So I'm just going to kind of augment that and give my own spin on it. He gave his takeaways, and what's going to happen is I'm going to give you my takeaways from my last 2 years of experience within doing assessments within this field. As Tim mentioned, I've been around since about 2002 doing information security. I did security management and incident response up until about 2010 when I got brought on board to do some assessments. It was a big push in the smart grid arena. And that's when I started doing security research on advanced metering infrastructure, penetration testing in these types of environments, and just really took off from there, just really piqued my interest. And I really enjoyed it. So I've been doing that ever since. And fortunately, just a couple of months ago, I did enough to become a certified SANS instructor. I do teach the ICS 410 class. I will be teaching that, starting that on Monday. So if some of you are in that class with me, you know, thanks for coming, and we're going to have a great time next week. But we're here to talk about the security assessments, okay? And I need to start this talk off with some considerations, all right? These are sanitized examples. I'm really nervous about this because it goes to reputation. I have cleaned this up as much as possible. I think that I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't think it's important. I wouldn't be talking about it if I didn't think that I needed to describe a few things to help you understand why I've got my takeaways at the end. Okay, so I will be putting it out there, but if it seems like I'm not elaborating on certain things, of course it's on purpose. Okay, this is an extremely small sample set. Me and my team, we can only do so much in a 2-year period. So while some large organizations are going to have a better representation across certain sectors, you're going to see that I went into a lot of different sectors, and hopefully that will help strengthen some of the takeaways that I'm going to provide at the end. Remember, you're going to see some issues. I'm going to call out some issues and I'm going to call out some strengths. But remember that every one of the organizations that I talk about in here, they are moving in the right direction. They want to improve their team. They want to improve their security program, and they're asking outside people to come in and take a look. So if you're doing that for your teams, you're a step ahead, right? You're moving in the right direction. And then lastly, I added this, at the very end, because I think it's important. COVID has played a concern in this area. I've had several security assessments canceled. I've had several shift, and they just keep on shifting. And that is, that's harder on some of the smaller organizations, and even on some of the larger information security organizations. But then at the same time, I turn around and I consider what the impact is having on the issues within those environments that we would be going into and assess. And they're not being provided with some of the good feedback, and their teams are not leveraging this input of information that they could be. So that's definitely a consideration I think that we should take away from this. All right, so let's get into it. But before I start talking about security assessments, I need to kind of set the stage for OT security assessments and the different types of things that there are, because this is really important. All right, I'm not going to read through every single one of these. This is an eye chart. Of course it is. You're going to get the slide decks later. You can go and take a closer look at that. The point I want to try to make from this is usually when I get approached to do a security assessment, it's like, hey, Don, I want you to come in. I want you to do a pen test of my environment. Or it's like, hey, let's do some red teaming. Well, as soon as I hear that, as soon as somebody approaches me with that, I'm like, hey, you know what? Let's rescope that. Okay, let's talk about what your actual requirements are, because more than likely, I'm willing to bet that you don't want me to pen test your actual process. Now, some organizations do need that pen test if you've got regulatory requirements, or if you have a strong security program and a strong team in place, and you want to test how they do when an adversary is in their network, then certainly we can, I provide those assessments. But you're going to see in the last 2 years, I have never done a pen test or a red team. It's all been either a security program maturity assessment or a security assessment of a specific system or product. All right. Also, I included all of these other things: vendor research, security research, threat modeling, because these are things that your internal teams can be doing as a part of your risk and vulnerability management program. So all of these things are important. You can have outside people doing this, but certainly your internal people can do it as well. On the left-hand side of the slide, you see that I have OT risk and cost. That all varies by goal and experience, but I think this is a pretty accurate representation around there. And we have to identify, when we're talking about security assessments within these environments, we have to identify that there is potential risk. Okay. All right. I need to use that. Okay. So the first one, when I got back into doing security assessments again back in 2019, I was fortunate. The first one that I got to do was within distribution. So I went to a warehouse and got to evaluate. They had actually brought me on to evaluate a system that they were using to update their one of their warehouses. The security team was really concerned about some of the wireless technologies that were being deployed in there, and they wanted to understand the additional risk associated with that. So we came in to do that, and as soon as we got there, we realized that the biggest risk to their process, to their control network, wasn't this new component. We did a security assessment of that, but the biggest risk was the relationship between their IT security team and their OT team. In other words, the OT team was on board with doing a security assessment, but nobody had talked to them about goals and the reasons why, or timing, or anything like that. So they were right off the bat, they were against the security assessment. They provided limited information and support for it. And as we started delving into how they're implementing things and identifying things that were increasing the risk for their process, eventually we got to the point where somebody got in my face and said, why don't you just go away and let us do our job? Talking about let us do the process. And that was an eye-opener to me. And I realized that it was related to that relationship between the IT security team and the OT team, and that they hadn't, the lack of comms there. But what was great about that whole organization is that they had a strong corporate security program. And I knew that as soon as they got the information that we're going to provide to them in our reports, that they were going to be able to utilize that information and turn it around. This next place I got to go in was even more fun. So I got to go take a look at a few distilleries and travel around in a certain state. This is obviously related to the food and beverage sector. And we were there, they brought us in to do a security maturity assessment for their security program. And when we got there, their IT and IT security teams understood the issues that we were going to find. They just needed somebody to kind of from outside to say, hey, yeah, these are issues. And when we went and evaluated their networks, we determined that they had one good plant that was really implementing a lot of good security controls. At another location, they thought they were mimicking that, but we found a lot of issues associated with that implementation. And that just raised their concern, the IT security or the IT team's concern about the mergers and acquisitions, other plants that were coming in that they didn't understand their security maturity there. Okay. So those are the issues that we identified there. Strengths associated with that team. And the most important one is that last one, that last bullet right there. We were actually delayed in some of the things that we could do because the OT IT guy that we were, that was our liaison that was helping us gain access to the different areas. He was actually involved in an incident response. He wasn't participating in it, but he was listening on the phone. And he was listening specifically so that he could provide guidance associated with, hey, that is going to impact the control network in this area. And I was really impressed with that. They were very mature about that. I was happy to see. The thing that was probably the biggest issue out of that wasn't necessarily implementation of everything, but it was the fact that their OT IT team was assigned all of the IT tasks in their control network, but then they were given the additional tasks of being the IT security experts in the OT network. So they were completely full up of tasks to do with their normal job, and then IT security was given to them as well. So they were overtaxed. The next assessment that I was able to go to was pretty interesting. I hadn't seen a smart building before, and so it was a lot of fun to go in and interact with a smart building, experience a lot of the technologies associated with that. This organization was doing physical security really well, but they had an issue around that. In other words, we identified physical security issues that they hadn't taken into consideration. And they weren't really surprised about that per se, but they were surprised about the level of access we were able to get once we got past their physical security and how deep we got within their network. What was great about this whole thing, what was a really strong a strength of this organization is that they were completely segregated from the internet. The building was not on the internet. We were going in saying, yeah, we'll find it. We'll get to the internet. And absolutely, we identified that they were not there. But the biggest strength, I think, is that leadership was right there. They wanted to know what we found. They wanted to know what they could do to improve it. And they were asking their people, okay, what do you need to help change these things? So the leadership buy-in was definitely there, and it was great to see with this organization. From there, I went to a substation. I did a substation assessment. This was more of a security assessment. They wanted to take a look at some of the things that they were deploying, also help them with some asset identification. So we did provide that. My biggest issue about this was, even though this was a low risk substation, it was actually, we were testing the We were testing all of the equipment before it was going out to replace an older substation. And unfortunately, they were not changing all the default passwords and some of the configuration settings for these devices that were going to be put in place at the substation. I think that they missed a huge opportunity around that, even if their risk model for this type of substation said that they didn't need to manage it at that level. Me personally, I think that if we're going to move our security of our organization in a positive direction, we're going to at least get rid of those default credentials. So I think that was a missed opportunity in this area. Fortunately, I do know that this organization has a strong security program. They're doing a lot of changes within their organization. Unfortunately, it was not fully implemented. There was a lot of stuff that was still in the approval process. And because it wasn't mandatory, this substation was getting deployed without some of those considerations. In the future, in the close future, that's going to turn around. But of course, once we're all concerned about things being deployed in this people deploying control networks and not being able to change it. So default credentials are going to live there for a long time, in my view. Okay, the next thing was a security assessment of a vendor product. This was a lot of fun because I got to go look at a battery skid. I hadn't even seen this before, and it was really interesting because there was some proprietary communication technologies in there, and we got to look at what the vendor did to solve the solution and some of the choices that they had made around security. And I think that was the biggest thing, is that the vendor did take certain security issues into consideration, but they were really focused on reducing the cost of this service, of the system that they were providing. And they were really hesitant to make any changes, any improvements around certain things, because it would require change to how they're deploying a lot of things. And the fact that this was integrated with the cloud, it would could have an impact with that. But certainly what was the strong part of this is that my client was actually doing a security assessment of the vendor's product to identify all of those issues, to identify the connectivity and security issues, and turn around and ask the vendor, hey, how are you addressing this? And if the vendor's not going to do it, they were going to figure out the security controls within their environment to take care of that. So that was a top priority for them, to understand the risk that the vendor was placing on them. Also, a good strength for this is that they realized that this was going to be a risk, and the physical security around this was a top priority for them. And all of our recommendations to improve the security of this skid was they paid a lot of attention to it, and I know they're making those changes. From there, I went and I got to see a kind of another substation-esque kind of microgrid implementation for a data center. They're implementing a substation and generation in case the power went out. And I wish I'd had this for my house when I'm down here in Texas. It would have been very nice to have it over the during the last cold snap. But I got to take a look and go into an implementation at a vendor site. In other words, this was a factory acceptance test, and we did our security assessment at that. So it was an excellent choice of when to do the security assessment, and with low risk to the actual production environment. So it was, I was pleasantly surprised to see that. And going in there, the implementation of all the products was, I really enjoyed looking at proper implementation. Now, there's a caveat to that, okay? It was properly implemented by the vendor team, and I believe that I can really, specifically associate that with the actual team that was selected to implement that. If they had gotten any other team from this vendor, it was very likely that the security protections that were put in place would not have been there, because the vendor's OT security team, like corporate team, I guess, that's pushing down security configuration guidance for their solutions. That wasn't there. The team that just happened to be a part of this factory acceptance testing had been to some security training on their own. They had researched some security configuration settings, both for OSs and for their own products on their own, and they did it for this and worked it into the documentation that was going to go for the implementation. So that was a strong thing about this. But unfortunately, I say unfortunate because the client expected this from the vendor, but the vendor expected specific guidance from the client. And we'll see in my issues or my takeaways how that plays a role. From there, after that, I went and did some simulator development work for another team. And this was more of a fun project. I got to interact with an excellent team that was really experienced in developing simulators for vehicles. And probably the issue that I came up with, associated with this, not really an issue. It was interesting to see how different vendors interpreted protocols, the RFCs, and their implementation of those protocols, and how different components of just a vehicle implemented those protocols different, in a different manner, and how we had to account for that as we're building the simulator, as we're figuring out how to ingest the information from different components from different vendors. That was a challenge, but it's a challenge, the type of challenge that when we're doing research like this, we like to take on. So this was actually a really fun one for me because I got to work with some highly experienced team members, and those fun projects go a long way to to killing the monotony of constantly telling people that you need to improve this, improve this, and improve this. So I really enjoyed this one. And then finally, the last security assessment I did at the end of 2020 was another substation review. But this was specifically a security program maturity assessment that was remote. I couldn't go on site. I couldn't do the interviews with the OT teams that I was hoping for, and it was just all document review. And we got a long way. It was pretty good. Actually, the thing that I'm most proud of out of this, and this goes back once again to some of the things that Rob pointed out in his keynote, is we had a critical finding, and it was associated with how they were implementing their Active Directory network or Active Directory implementation, their domains within their control network. And just from document review, I had a critical finding, and hopefully they're going out and addressing that. Other than that, for this assessment, I like the fact that they were doing this because this actually started with the audit team for this organization, and they wanted to understand. They had looked at all of their substations and documentations and processes for years, but they wanted to know where their gaps were and how they could improve by bringing in outside help to take a look at it and improve their process and really improve their security program. So it was fun to be a part of that. So those are all of the assessments that I did. Certainly, as I mentioned, it was a small set of assessments, but as you can see, we have some similar things across a lot of different sectors within OT. So these are my takeaways, and I've got 4 takeaways, okay? The first one, and we talked about this a little bit, the vendors and integrators expect security requirements from clients, but the clients expect vendors and integrators to provide secure solutions. So we've got, this is like 2 magnets. You've got a magnet in each hand, and you're pointing the positive poles at each other, and they're not coming together whatsoever. Okay, no matter how you push, they're always going to be off. We need to turn those magnets around. The way we do that is we need all of the clients to remember that they are responsible for defining security requirements. Now, I'm not talking about that you have to define security procedures. You don't need to drill all the way down, but you do need to provide requirements to the vendors and integrators and then test to those. Your quality assurance people, they're already testing your requirements for implementation of the process anyways. Get those security requirements to them, and then the vendors will do it. Certainly they're going to vary their prices and so forth, but you got to get those requirements in upfront. It's the client's responsibility. Vendors and integrators are not providing their OT teams, so the teams that are helping their clients implement these things or that are getting on the phone to troubleshoot issues, they're not providing their internal teams with security configuration guidance. Okay, this is improving, but I just got back from that assessment where I was on site at a vendor that supplies a lot of utilities, and their teams were doing it on their own. Okay, and that's great, but they should be pushing this information back down to their teams so it's done consistently for all of their clients. And so that's my recommendation. You need to pull that documentation together about your products, about how things are implemented correctly from a network standpoint, and then train your teams to it, and then push that out to your clients, because that's what they need. Next is lack of communications between OT and the OT teams and the IT teams. And 2 years ago at the Gas and Oil Summit, when I was given a talk, this was one of the biggest issues that came up when I was talking to OT security teams from the gas and oil field. And their biggest success is when they went out and they sat down with the operators, they sat down with the engineers, and they just learned about the process first. They didn't try to make any changes. They didn't talk about how they're going to modify certain things or why things are bad. They just learned about the process first. They understood the process. They learned what the operators were doing, and then they started making recommendations. That's how they got further in the process. And it's certainly that's the only way to advance this security within our control network environments, is if we understand the process, and then we can make recommendations of how to improve the security towards making sure that that process is resilient and reliable. Okay. And then finally, and this is the biggest one, I saved this for last because it's the most important. And I think if you remember back to every single one of the presentations that we've listened to today, one of the biggest things that is across all of them is this one right here. There is not enough monitoring or incident response planning. Now, I had bullet points in every single one of my slides for my assessments, and I think about 80% of them had no monitoring. Okay, it should have been all of them, because there was no monitoring at any of the sites that I went to. There's no OT monitoring. Okay, and I think that is a significant issue that we need to address as we're moving forward within this field. And that's it. Those are my 4 takeaways. I really appreciate everybody taking the time. This is my contact information. If you have any questions, I'll be in the Slack channel. Probably finishing a little bit earlier, but Tim, that's all I have.
Thank you very much. That is an awesome closing talk. I have one question, and I think I'm going to reword it for you. And that question was going to be, do you believe organizations are getting better at asking for the right types of things? For years, we heard about people doing pen tests or assessments or vulnerability assessments of OT areas, and kind of the way those RFPs or those bids went out, there were flaws and there were issues. The way I'm going to ask you kind of the also known as question is, can you think of an assessment that you didn't do? So one that you were asked to do, one that came in, you sort of looked at it and realized this isn't the job for me. They're asking me to do something that would be too risky, too much liability, too many problems. They don't know what they don't know.
So I've never said no to an assessment that I have experience with. I've recommended and redirected people to people with the experience within that area. In other words, I've turned down assessments, but I haven't really told somebody that they're asking for the wrong thing. I've redirected. I've helped people rescope it. So when I have experience and I know I can help them, I have done that. But in the cases where I couldn't rescope it because they had their teeth set into the bit and they were going to drive forward, when I got on site, I took care of that myself. Okay, in other words, I did my assessments in a way that was appropriate for the process, that limited risk to their process, but provided them the amounts of information that they needed to to understand where they could do improvements. I would say from all of the, I've been pleasantly surprised. I gave the slide that said all of the different types of security assessments, and I have seen a reduction in me having to rescope things. A lot of people that are coming to me are asking for an evaluation of their security program rather than a pen test. So I am seeing that change, but it might be just the people that are coming to me.
That's great. I really appreciate you sanitizing this as much as you could to where you were comfortable and still giving us enough detail so it's actionable for us. Every once in I pull out my own journal and write down notes from different talks, and I really liked your analogy of the magnet to magnet. And I thought about that myself from, long ago. There was probably this battle 50, 60 years ago that eventually left from vendors and asset owners where they had to work together on the topic of building safe automation systems and safe process. And, it's not an option for somebody to come together on a solution and say, well, do you want to buy the one that has safety considerations in it? Because that's going to cost you more money. They just bake it in and it's part of the design and it's expected. And I think time is coming where those two parties are going to be coming together, from the asset owners and the vendors and integrators, to a point where cybersecurity and basic kind of controls are going to be a must, that are just expected, and they're not options that need to be pursued. Thanks again, Don. Greatly appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, sir. I appreciate it.
Yep.